A Czech town spent years locked in paperwork, chasing permits and blueprints for a $1.2 million drought-busting dam. Then, before the first excavator could break ground, officials awoke to find their water problem mysteriously solved overnight. No budget was spent, no engineers were on site, and the only workers involved never asked for permission. What force accomplished in hours, what bureaucracy failed to deliver in years, and left everyone questioning who really masters the landscape. The answer upended everything they thought about water, law, and control. In the Czech countryside, rivers once twisted through fields and forests, slowing water and feeding deep aquifers. That balance began to unravel in the 20th century. Engineers, determined to control floods and speed navigation, straightened river channels and boxed them in with concrete and stone. Over time, nearly half the main rivers in the Czech part of the Danube basin were forced into rigid lines. The result was a landscape that drained like a bathtub. Rainfall that once lingered in meanders now shot downstream in hours, leaving the land dry long before summer's heat arrived. Aerial maps from the 1960s show broad wetlands and oxbow lakes, patches of blue and green scattered across the lowlands. By the 1990s, many of those features had vanished. Hydrologists measured the change in flow. Runoff speeds had doubled in some catchments, and groundwater tables dropped by as much as 2 meters in the hardest-hit regions. In dry years, streams shrank to trickles or disappeared entirely, exposing cracked mud and stranded fish. Towns that relied on shallow wells faced water restrictions, and farmers watched their crops wilt weeks earlier than before. The so-called drainpipe effect became a national concern. Water that once seeped into the ground was now lost downstream, unreachable for roots and wells. Each winter, snowmelt surged through the channels, swelling rivers for a few days, before vanishing into the Elbe or Danube. By midsummer, fields baked under a relentless sun, and the soil turned to powder. The urgency to slow this loss grew with every drought, but the solutions, new weirs, retention ponds, and efforts to restore meanders stalled in the labyrinth of planning offices and environmental reviews. Hydrologists sounded alarms, pointing to data from automated gauges and groundwater wells. The land was losing its memory of rain. Without intervention, the Czech countryside would face a future of empty aquifers and dying streams, no matter how much money or paperwork officials threw at the problem. Every plan to restore water in the Czech lowlands began with paperwork. Before a single stone could be set, the project demanded a thick stack of permits, each one a checkpoint, in a system built to slow mistakes. But just as often, it slowed solutions. Engineers and councilors met in stuffy town halls, poring over environmental impact assessments and blueprints that sprawled across tables. The checklist ran long: land registry approvals, flood risk analyses, wildlife surveys, and public comment periods. Each step required signatures from different agencies, each with its own deadlines and objections. The proposed dam near the Klabava stream was no exception. The idea first appeared in council minutes in 2018, pitched as a way to reverse decades of drainage and bring back wet meadows. Initial surveys took months as botanists counted rare orchids and hydrologists mapped groundwater flows. By the time the first application reached the regional office, new regulations had come into force. The team rewrote their proposal, adding mitigation plans for protected amphibians and submitting revised blueprints for yet another round of review. Years passed in this loop. The Military Forest Administration, which owned much of the land, had to sign off on every change. The Vltava River Basin Authority required updated modeling after a record flood. Each agency's approval came with conditions, sometimes conflicting, always time-consuming. The cost of the project climbed with each revision, reaching 30 million Czech korunas, or about $1.2 million. Even as droughts grew worse, the dam remained a concept on paper, stuck in a queue behind dozens of other urgent requests. By early 2025, the project was technically shovel-ready. All that remained was the final environmental assessment and a last round of public hearings. Field teams scheduled a site visit to begin preliminary work, expecting to see the same dry gully they had surveyed for years. Instead, they found a landscape transformed, and the official process, so carefully managed, suddenly irrelevant. Surveyors arrived at the Klabava site expecting the same dry channel they had measured for years. Instead, their boots sank into soft mud where cracked earth had been. The automated gauge that logs water levels every 15 minutes told a story no one could explain. In a single night, the stream's flow chart spiked, and water that had vanished for summers now pooled behind a new barrier. The digital log showed a rise of nearly a meter by dawn, an increase that would have taken weeks with pumps or heavy machinery. Yet there were no tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of concrete or steel. Engineers compared the latest data to last month's readings. The hydrograph, once a flat line, now traced an abrupt climb. A second check confirmed the result. The water table upstream had jumped, and flow downstream slowed to a trickle. One team member stared at the printout and muttered that this was not possible, that they had not even broken ground. Time-lapse graphs from the monitoring station captured the change in precise increments, each bar marking the silent rise of water through the night. The site, untouched by human hands, had transformed itself. The only clues were fresh-cut willow stumps and a tangle of branches woven tightly across the streambed. The central question hung in the air: who or what had finished the job before the first shovel hit the dirt? The mystery didn't last long. Fresh tracks on the muddy banks led the field team to a tangled mass of willow branches, slick with mud and studded with gnawed sticks. Hidden among the reeds, 8 Eurasian beavers, castor fiber, had claimed the site as their own. A farmer from a nearby village, out before dawn to check his fences, spotted the first ripple of brown fur in the shallows. "I thought it was a wild pig at first," he later told reporters, "but then I saw the tail, flat as a shovel, and realized what had happened. The beavers had arrived quietly, likely following the scent of running water upstream from the main river. Once they found the sound of the exposed stream, their instincts kicked in. Working through the night, the family hauled branches and stones, weaving them into a barrier tight enough to slow the current. Each member played a part: adults dragging saplings, yearlings packing mud, kits darting in and out of the water with mouthfuls of grass. Unlike construction crews, beavers don't wait for blueprints or permits. Their colonization is opportunistic, driven by the promise of food and the need for safe, deep water. Nocturnal by nature, they worked unseen, their activity masked by darkness and the thick forest canopy. By morning, the stream's voice was muffled, and a pond had begun to form where dry ground had been just hours before. The town's million-dollar plan had been overtaken by a crew that didn't bother to clock in or out. The next question for officials was how their handiwork compared to the project that had been years in the making. Municipal engineers arrived at the site with blueprints in hand, ready to measure the ground for their long-delayed concrete weir. Instead, they found a structure already spanning the channel, a dense layered rampart of willow branches, stones, and packed mud. The beaver dam ran nearly perpendicular to the flow, its crest aligned with the planned survey markers with precision within a margin of centimeters. Drone photogrammetry captured a mesh model of the dam, showing a broad base of interwoven logs and rocks, tapering upward to a flexible crown that rose nearly 1 meter above the old streambed. Unlike the rigid lines of a poured concrete wall, the beaver construction flexed under pressure, its outer layers swelling with water and sealing leaks in real time. Hydrologists noted that the dam's composite, alternating bands of wood, silt, and stone, created a living matrix that distributed force and absorbed the shock of rising water. Where human structures risk catastrophic failure from a single crack, the Beaver Dam's meshwork allowed it to bend and self-heal. On cross-section, engineers measured a storage volume nearly identical to the original project's specifications, with upstream water held at a steady height and the downstream flow reduced to a controlled trickle. The audit concluded the structure not only matched, but exceeded the planned resilience, all without a single bag of cement or steel rod in sight. Beavers do not work from a blueprint or follow a leader. Their construction is driven by something far simpler and more reliable: the acoustic cue of running water. Ethologists have tested this instinct in controlled experiments by playing recordings of trickling streams beside captive beavers. Each time, the animals responded with the same focused urgency, gathering mud, sticks, and stones to bury the source of the noise. The drive is so strong that even a hidden speaker sealed behind glass draws a flurry of building until the last drop of sound is muffled. In the wild, this acoustic trigger means any exposed current becomes a signal to act. The beaver's entire engineering process is a feedback loop. As long as water is heard, construction continues. Mud is pressed into gaps, branches are woven tighter, and stones are wedged into the base. When the stream finally falls silent, the work stops, precision achieved not by sight, but by ear. This instinct is not just a quirk. It is the reason beaver dams rarely fail. If a leak opens, the sound returns, and repairs begin within hours. The result is a structure that adapts to changing flows and pressures, maintained nightly by the same simple rule. This behavioral blueprint, honed over millions of years, creates a dam that is both flexible and reliable, qualities that human designs struggle to match, especially when the budget is measured in millions. The municipal spreadsheets told a simple story. The dam project near Klabava was budgeted at 30 million Czech korunas, or about $1.2 million. Years of engineering fees, environmental reviews, and land registry filings had pushed the cost higher with each delay. But as officials stood on the muddy bank, the numbers became meaningless. The volume of water now held behind the Beaver Dam matched the original design, without a single koruna spent free. The mayor called an emergency meeting expecting legal hurdles. Instead, the town's legal advisor arrived with a copy of the EU Habitats Directive and a memo from the Czech Nature Conservation Agency. Under Article 12, beaver habitats are strictly protected. Any attempt to remove or alter the dam would require a formal exemption justified by overriding public interest and subject to strict review. Such exemptions are rarely granted, especially inside a designated protected landscape. The law was clear. The Beaver Dam could not be dismantled, even if the municipality wanted to proceed with its own construction. The official project, years in the making, was now redundant. The only option was to accept the outcome. Nature had delivered the same result, free of charge, and European law locked it in. The budget line for construction vanished, replaced by a legal obligation to protect what the beavers had built. Well water readings from farms bordering the new beaver pond told the story in numbers, not anecdotes. In the week after the dam appeared, groundwater probes logged a 12-centimeter rise in the water table. That shift, barely the length of a finger, meant the difference between dry wells and summer irrigation. Soil moisture sensors, buried beneath last year's stubble, recorded a jump from 19 to 47%. One farmer who had watched his barley fields turn brittle in June drove a spade into the earth and found it cool and pliant. He said he had not seen it hold this much water since he was a boy. The Beaver Dam forced water sideways out of the stream bed and into the ground, recharging an aquifer that had been shrinking for decades. By the end of the month, runoff from a single thunderstorm lingered in the fields instead of vanishing overnight. For the first time in years, the land acted less like a drain pipe and more like a sponge, ready to weather whatever the next drought might bring. By nightfall, the beavers' work is far from over. As soon as the sun drops, the family fans out along the dam, searching for leaks with noses and paws. Field ecologists tracking their movements with infrared camera traps have recorded a pattern. The moment water starts to trickle through a weak spot, the sound draws the nearest beaver into action. Mud and sticks arrive within minutes. In one time-lapse sequence, a fresh breach caused by a rising current was sealed in under 5 minutes. The repair cycle is relentless. Every night, the dam is inspected, patched, and strengthened, with each beaver specializing in a different section. Unlike concrete, which cracks and erodes with every freeze and thaw, the beaver dam flexes and heals. Its structure is alive, adapting to pressure changes and new water flows. The maintenance is not just routine, it is continuous, ensuring the dam's resilience long after human projects would need their first repairs. This level of upkeep, captured in field notes and camera logs, has become a model for restoration advocates far beyond the Czech border. Across the Atlantic, a new generation of land managers is watching the Czech outcome with keen interest. In Scotland's Knapdale Forest, government-backed trials released beavers into fenced watersheds and tracked the changes for 5 years. The results were decisive. Peak flood levels dropped by up to 30% downstream of beaver dams, and summer flows held steadier through droughts. England's river otter beaver trial followed, with scientists documenting restored wetlands, improved water quality, and a resurgence of amphibians and birds. In Utah, state biologists began airlifting beavers into remote headwaters scarred by wildfire and erosion. There, the ponds slowed flash floods, filtered sediment, and sparked the return of native fish. Each program adopted its own governance model, some run by wildlife agencies, others by partnerships of farmers and conservation groups. They all share a checklist: monitor water levels, measure biodiversity, and let the beavers do the heavy lifting. As the evidence grows, municipalities from Bavaria to California are drafting policies to make room for nature's engineers, recognizing that the most effective water infrastructure may come with fur and teeth, instead of steel and concrete. Today, as Europe faces record droughts, governments now deploy beavers, nature's engineers, to restore water systems that concrete failed to fix. The Czech experience is no anomaly. Beaver reintroduction is surging from Scotland to California, backed by measurable rises in groundwater and biodiversity. Sometimes, the most advanced technology is instinct. The question now is not whether we trust beavers, but whether we trust nature itself. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.